Hey everybody, Brad Geiger here, and I just wanted to let you know about the new Kickstarter I just announced at newevilbook.com. I'm kickstarting 2 books at the same time, and I'd love for you to check them out. The first is a Safe for Work collection of all of the Evil Inc. stories from 2018 to 2020. It's 120 glossy pages of super villainous fun. The second book is not safe for work. It takes the first book and adds more than 30 pages of corresponding storylines from Evil Inc. After Dark. You can get whichever one suits you best, or even both. You know, one for show, one for whoa. All of this plus digital extras, artist editions, digital commissions, and even a rare opportunity to get some inked original art. It's all at newevilbook.com.
So a few months ago, my friend Brad inspired me by getting a health checkup. He got a colonoscopy, and I was like, you know what? Good for him. He's out there doing it. So when I turned 50, Brad, I was like, you know what? I'm doing the full run. I'm doing EKG for the heart. I'm doing prostate screening, colonoscopy. I'm doing skin cancer screening. I'm getting all my teeth checked. I'm doing all this, that. Bada bing, bada boom, bada boom. We got a full blood screen done. And I had this procedure last week, Brad, where they gave me propofol, which is this go-to-sleep medicine, you know? Like, what do you call that? Go to sleep medicine.
It's an anesthetic. You're gonna get your memory checked at some point.
Yeah. So it's a general anesthetic, and the anesthesiologist, it's on an IV, and 3 times from 3 different people at UCLA Hospital, and then twice in written forms that I had to sign, I had to affirm that I was not going to make any legal or business decisions in the next 24 hours after I got the propofol.
Oh my gosh.
5 different times, Brad, they told me don't make any legal. They kept saying the word legal decisions. Don't make any legal decisions. And
my gosh.
I finally turned to the anesthesiologist and I was like, how big of a problem is this? And she said last year they had a patient that bought a car that they neither wanted nor needed after being on propofol. And I was like, holy hell. I guess it's real.
They bought a car that they didn't want, they didn't need?
Yeah, they just went out and bought a car.
That must be a boon for the Tesla distributorship.
Well, can you imagine? You're like, hey, so how'd the colonoscopy go? Great. I sold my house for $5. I got a divorce. Things are looking up. And you're like, what have you done, Brad? What have you done?
Told my wife to hit the bricks? Yeah,
exactly.
And I'm going to go join the circus.
So with huge thanks to my friend Brad, and this is genuine, huge thanks to my friend Brad for being a guide and a role model to me. Just remind me that it's worth it to do the health checkups. They take 5 minutes out of your life.
This is the time to do it.
And so I still have to go. In a week and a half, I go do the skin cancer screening, but I'm just getting them all done, and I feel great about it, and I thank Brad for that because it's a good thing to do. You got to be an adult about it, and it's a good thing to do. So on that note of friendship and of not making any legal decisions right now, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal, Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend.
Wait a minute, Dave. I got one question about the propofol. Real quick. You're an independent comics artist. You run your own business. How do you go 24 hours without making an important business decision?
You know what I did? I fired up my PlayStation, which I don't turn on very often. And I was like, well, this is a day that's going to be wasted.
Did you really do that? Where you're like, I'm gonna not make any decisions at all.
I told my wife, I said, you know what? They told me 5 times, Brad. It wasn't once.
Oh my God.
It was like they really wanted to drive home. Like, don't make any bad decisions. Just kind of chill out for 24 hours. So I told my wife, I said, I'm not supposed to drive. So you'll have to be the chauffeur for the family. Yeah. I said, I can't make any business decisions. So I'm not going to do it. And my writing is probably going to be wonky if I try to write on propofol remnants. So I'm just going to fire up the PlayStation, which was a time waster that I rarely do. So
you now, as of today, your decision making is back on track. You are 100% in your proper mental state.
As far as we know, yes. I will tell you though that going on propofol, I was thinking about our conversation about how you ceased to exist for a while.
Yes.
Because my anesthesiologist is like, all right, I could see her plunging the propofol into the IV, you know?
Yeah.
And I literally asked her, so how long does it take to kick in? And that was the last thing I said. And then suddenly I'm being wheeled down a hallway by a really nice guy named Osama. And I was having a lovely conversation already in progress with Osama. And I didn't realize that I was talking. And I was like, wow, that was bonkers. It shut me off like a light. And then suddenly I'm in a hallway 45 minutes later. It was crazy.
And then all of a sudden you didn't exist, and then you did exist.
Yeah, but it made me existential, but in a lovely way. It made me appreciate all the details of being here, if you know what I mean. Like of smelling hospital smells and going down a hallway and talking to a new person, and like you're like, oh, hooray, I'm still here. You know, it's kind of lovely.
Yeah, I had a similar feeling, although it was more, I got very existential about the juice box and cookies that they gave me. I had a big, after having fasted for so long, I got very existential over those cookies.
I ended up fasting for 45 hours beforehand. That was how long I went. It was, oh man, I wolfed down that terrible apple juice that they gave me. It was delightful.
Yeah, it was great.
Well, I'm gonna jump us into our first question, Brad, coming in over at patreon.com/comiclab. I'm a reminder that if you are a listener, you're jumping in right now to help us get to 500 Patreon pals, because when you do, we're going to get 2 episodes of Drunk and Drunker Comic Lab. So jump in over at patreon.com/comic lab. And this question comes in from Andrew Law Art, who writes, Brad and Dave, with regards to the view on Kickstarter, first comes the crowd, then comes the funding. And crossing it over to recent discussions on finding alternate methods to battle the enshittification of various social media platforms. Here's the question. Couldn't doing a Kickstarter count as both a way of getting your comics out there to help gain more of a crowd, and also view it as a kind of loss leader for building long term? I have seen a few comic friends slowly build their brands and business using Kickstarter. Of all the platforms we use, Kickstarter seems to be the least enshittified, the least algorithmic, and the best for aiming our niche audience, our niche product, at a niche market. So Brad, I will give it full points. This is a unique question. I have never thought about using Kickstarter for a social media platform, or social media outreach rather. What are your thoughts on this? I would love to hear it.
I think that this is a smart. I think this is a smart strategy. In other words, everything that Andrew said is correct. Yeah. Right. Yep. Kickstarter delivers big time on discoverability. As a matter of fact, you know as well as I do. In fact, we're both planning Kickstarters as we speak. I haven't done one since 2019, so I'm feeling very awkward about it. But you've done one. You've been kind of doing them right along. So you know even better than I do that sometimes 20 or 30% of your Kickstarter backers discovered you on Kickstarter. Yep. In other words, they didn't know you from Adam on the day they discovered you. And not only do they discover you and decide they like what you're doing, they plunk money down in that moment. That's really really powerful. And then they get a physical piece of merchandise to seal the deal a little bit later. And if you can't make them a fan by that point, you had them and you lost them fair and square. It just wasn't the right fit for them. Any number of things. And so what Andrew's saying is something that's been in the back of my mind as I'm starting this year. And that was, I wanted to, the reason that I focused on Kickstarter so solidly in the beginning of this year was kind of the same thing. I was seeing I've got a limited ability to find new audience members on Twitter, which was my go-to. And the other social media either never was there or hasn't gotten there yet. Right. Or in some cases, maybe it's never going to be there. And I've been thinking about this a lot. So I got to, like you said, full points to Andrew. I think this is an acceptable strategy. I think his head is in the right place. There's only one thing we've got to really stress, especially for people who might be just starting out. People who might be just listening to this, they're trying to replace audience building with this, and that is the following. it's all well and good until you got to actually fulfill that Kickstarter. And then if you drop the ball at that point, not only have you are you going counter to your goals of building an audience, but you're actually building a negative reputation. You're building a name for yourself that is not good. If you've taken money and then you can't deliver on the goods, or even if you're late, a month late is okay. 2 months late, pretty soon it gets to pile up. And that's the only thing that I want to warn people about. Actually, I've got a follow up to that too. There's two things I think, but the headline there is everything that this question asker said is a really good point, but it's not without risk. And the risks. So if you throw a bad tweet out, it disappears in 7 seconds.
Yes,
right. Yes. It's like that's why I never bother if there's a misspelling on a tweet. I never bother telling the person about it because it disappears. Number one, there's no way to fix it. You can't edit it. Yeah. You're not going to delete it and redo it because the algorithm will punish you for that. It disappears in 7 seconds. It's gone, right? Yeah. That's kind of the beauty of social media is you can make mistakes and learn from them. And although I've never learned spelling, so I maybe that's not so great. But if you do a tweet that flops, it flops. If you do a Kickstarter that you accept money for, and then you can't deliver the goods, or you're having oh my God, so many people. I can tell by looking at their numbers. It's like, okay, here's a $500 Kickstarter, right? And I see what they're delivering. And I can look at it and say, you haven't factored in shipping. You haven't factored in things like buying boxes. You haven't factored in the fact that this is taxable income. There's no way you can deliver what you're promising for $500. Right. And I see these all the time. And it's not, the numbers are different based on what's being offered there. You can really get yourself in trouble, tax trouble, reader trouble, merchandise trouble. If you're looking at this solely as a way to build audience, I think, again, it's got its positive points, but oh boy, be aware of the risks.
Yeah, I like Brad. I end up coming down on this on the negative. But before I do, I want to lead with two positives and then give a critique, because that's always a lovely way to do it. So I will start by saying full kudos and full marks for some really unique orthogonal thinking in a tricky time for social media. And honestly, that's what you need. This kind of thinking is exactly what I would love to encourage people as they start to own and control their own business, is to always be searching for new ways to do it, because there's an awareness that existing tools, existing platforms are breaking or not working, or perhaps there's just a better way to do it, and why not search for it? And so full marks for doing that. And then secondly, one of the reasons why Brad and I always advise keeping your head on a swivel is that I might not think of this idea, Brad might not think of this idea, but Andrew thought of this idea. And that's why you got to keep your head on a swivel, because across 100 or 200 cartoonists at any given time, someone is trying something new that you're like, holy hell, there's something to that idea. That's both clever marketing or clever business or a clever way to do a comic thing. So it really is, it behooves you to keep your head on a swivel, because you get kind of free market testing across 100 or 200 cartoonists if you're paying attention. And so Brad and I, from a distance, had you not asked us this, we might be quietly watching Andrew to see how it's going, you know, and in a way, Andrew is doing the market testing for us to see if this works. But now I will tell you my critique of this, which is, I think it's the wrong tool for the job for what you're trying to do, as Brad was saying. And there's a couple of reasons for that, is that for each Kickstarter you do, you could, the way I would imagine you using this as social media is you would schedule your Kickstarter for a year from now. And you know how you can pre-sign up for Kickstarters, Brad, saying like, hey, let me know when it launches. But in the meantime, you would get all sort of the pre-announcements. in a way, if I was going to do a Kickstarter a year from now, and I said to Brad, hey, Brad, come follow me on Kickstarter, right? That's essentially a social media relationship in the interim, right? Like we all agree, Brad would get notifications via email. He would go check out the blog post. It's not unlike Substacky or Tumblr back in the day, maybe a little bit. It would be more bloggy, more long form, maybe some visuals. All of which is good. And you could include comics as you went along. Like here's page 1, here's page 2, here's page 3. So I get that tool could be made to work. But here's where I think it breaks down. As soon as that Kickstarter ends, how do you gracefully transfer all of those existing readers that you've now spent 12 months or 24 months building up? How do you put them onto the next project? You know what I mean? Like you have to say, hey guys, you all willingly signed up to this Kickstarter. Now I need you to agree to get a whole new set of notifications from my new Kickstarter that's starting a year from now or 2 years from now. So you see what I mean? Like the platform doesn't allow for transitioning from one to another. And I say this as someone who has 15 Kickstarters now, 14 under my company and one that I did with my company with Fred Schroeder. 15 Kickstarters. The communication is cattywampus. It's all over the place because people can reach me by direct mail. They can reach me on messages on the post. They can reach me on messages on the project, which is different. They can reach me by emailing through the system. It's too complicated by half, and it's not a great communications platform because, and this goes back to what Brad said at the beginning, it wasn't meant or set up to do the things that you want it to do. So I think the thinking here is great, but it's the wrong tool for the job, unfortunately.
Yeah, there are some risks. There are some real serious risks. And in terms of wrong tool for the job, you actually, I'm still going to come back to the other thought I had, but you just made me think of something else. And that is this. I've actually backed some Kickstarter projects that I regret to this day. And it isn't because I didn't get a perfectly nice piece of merchandise in the mail. And it's not that it was late or anything else. It's that this person, number one, did the cardinal rule, broke a cardinal rule of Kickstarter. They sent me an advertisement, a promo for somebody else's Kickstarter. They said,
I hate it.
Since you liked my thing, and this is clearly, when you run a Kickstarter, these people come out of the woodwork.
As soon as you launch, minute
number one. And so immediately I went and I tried to find this person's notifications on Kickstarter. As soon as they sent me a promo for somebody else's shit, nope, no notifications ever again. Do not ever take me off the list. I went into Kickstarter, and do you know, somehow I got another email. I get so many emails from this person.
They probably broke a rule of Kickstarter and scraped their own database and put it on their own thing. Yeah.
And I finally had to set it up in Gmail where if this person's name shows up, it just goes right to spam. Because I'm so angry that they did that. And then, of course, and this person is one of these people that do like 3 or 4 books a year. Like they've taken what Andrew's talking about and gone to the nth degree, and they're really, slamming away at using Kickstarter for social media.
Yeah.
And I'm so angry. I will never. I know this person's name. I've memorized it. If I ever get an email from him out of a different source or something, I'm trashing it immediately. Furious. And now, by the way, again, go back to my first comment. If he had sent a tweet that hit me wrong, do you think I'd be reacting this viscerally? No, of course not. But this is different. And by the way, he might have thought, hey, this is a perfectly good thing to do. I'll promote this guy's Kickstarter. By the way, how's that different from all the cross-promotion stuff that I've talked about in the past several months? It technically falls under the same aspects of cross-promotion.
But we know it's different. It's different,
big time different because it's it's super different when you send a direct email. That's direct content. It's not like I happen to be scrolling social media and I happen to see this thing. It's a completely different thing. So Andrew, this thing you're talking about has landmines all over the place, right? It's got a lot of problems that can pop up. And then it comes to this. Okay, so here's the point that I wanted to get around to. You're a newer person. You don't have a huge audience. Mm-hmm. So you're going to use Kickstarter as social media. And here's another reason it might not be the best tool for the job. If you are a new person, you don't have a whole lot of audience, you're not going to set a very big goal, are you? Because you're going to be afraid of not reaching your goal.
Right.
So instead of doing a Kickstarter in the way that I would consider proper, in that, and we've talked about this in the last couple of shows, the idea is not so much to get the books into the backers' hands, although that's part of it and an important part. The idea is to fund a book run that has a whole bunch that you put into storage that you can then sell in distribution, sell on your website, sell at conventions and personal appearances, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. It's not about getting the books into the hands of the backers. That's part of it, but it's not entirely it. So what happens? You don't have a big a group of audience. You don't have a lot of readers. So you set a much lower goal, and then you do those books on some print-on-demand outfit, right? And you deliver low-quality, print-on-demand, waxy pages that fall out of the binding because they haven't been glued properly.
Yeah.
You deliver crap. Wonderful. You made your goal. You made your $500 goal. You delivered crap. And again, in the same way that I've memorized that guy's name that sent me spam, they'll remember you for delivering low quality stuff. And the next time that you launch a Kickstarter, they're like, nah, nice enough person, but they deliver crap. I don't want another crappy book that's going to fall apart Print on demand has made huge strides since the days that you and I first intersected with it, the cafe press days. Print on demand has made big strides. And digital printing in general has gotten way better. But you got to ask yourself, if you're doing print on demand, you don't need a Kickstarter. You don't need a Kickstarter. If you're doing print on demand, you point them to print on demand, and they buy a book. Their demand is noted, and they get
their demand is book. Noted. Their demand is printed.
Print on demand. Yeah. So beware of that too. Quality counts, I think. It's not only quality, but the whole point of a Kickstarter is to fund your book run so that now you've got a whole bunch of books that technically you haven't paid any money for. So every time you sell them now on, like you go to Amazon Advantage, you're selling them on Amazon. That's 100% pure profit. That's how we make this business run. Is by playing the angles like that. And if you're not keeping that in mind, and if you don't have an audience that you can do that yet, again, you're going to be setting up a negative feedback loop where they're like, yeah, I like this guy, but the books are crap. That is going to hurt you in the long run.
Yeah. So I have two things to add to that. Three things, actually. One, I also have a Kickstarter project that I backed in the past that either sold on my email or has, I think what happened is the company that they partnered with to make this book, and I won't name the title, that company has a practice of just spamming the living hell out of you. And I have blocked them every which way from Sunday, like Brad, even on my Gmail. And still, somehow they still reach me. And it makes me actively avoid their work and want to wish for their failure because it bothers me so much. So don't do that. But secondly, I want to underline what Brad said too, which is that make sure the quality of your Kickstarter, especially if you're going to do a project like this, is of a high caliber. And I'll tell you without naming their names, I have a cartoonist that Brad and I came up with in the early 2000s. Incredibly talented, way more popular than Brad and I. They produced terrible books, like physically terrible books. And for having such a great editorial eye and aesthetic in their work, you would think, oh, well, they will seek out good printers, good work, good craftsmanship. They did not. And I tell you, Brad, I've never bought anything from them since in the 20 years after I bought a 3-pack of books, and every single one of them was terrible. So you got to know that like that has a knock-on effect. It's important to get it right. And especially if you're going to be using it as social media, because they will now intersect with one another. You know what I mean? In a way that, that they didn't traditionally. So the third thing that I want to say, and this is a new thought based on what Brad was, his own reminiscences, is that unlike social media, if you go with Andrew's path, which I think is admirable for the outside of the box thinking, but maybe not so good in execution, what you have to realize is that unlike social media, which algorithmically limits how you can reach someone, Kickstarter gives it to the power of the user, which A, is wonderful, but B, you might find that a lot of your users are like, I don't want these weekly updates of comics. Just tell me when the thing's going to launch. Like, which defeats the purpose, I guess, what I'm saying, of you using it as social media, because a lot of the control is in the hands of the backers and the users in that point.
Yeah. And just as we wrap this topic up, I want to circle around back to one thing that you talked about that has a little nuance to it that I want to make sure we get clear, because I could see there being some confusion here. You were talking about your 15 Kickstarters and reaching out to people that were past Kickstarter backers, and you're saying it's tough to move them up to the next thing. And all of that is valid, right?
Right.
But what you're not saying there, and I want to just clarify this. What Dave is not saying there is that it's not okay to reach out to former Kickstarter backers, right? That is 100% okay.
Oh yeah, Oh, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, and Dave does that. I do that. And listen, part of being one of Dave's backers is I know that when his next thing comes out, I'm going to get a notification because I was a backer for Anatomy of Dinosaurs. And I was also a backer for Pop Culture. So I'm going to get 2 emails from Dave. Yeah. I kind of know the score.
Hopefully spaced out if I'm doing it right. Like I'll do one week and I'll wait like 15 days.
It's not going to be a whole gang. Yeah. But that aspect, in other words, when you launch a Kickstarter, reaching out to former backers that you have access to their emails through Kickstarter, doing a post on that goes out and says, hey, you like this thing I did before, here's a new thing I'm doing now. That is 100% above board. What Dave is saying is that in terms of using Kickstarter as social media, it's tough to move them into the next thing that you're kind of doing an ongoing thing.
Right. So, for example, I did Anatomy of Dinosaurs, 24 months ago, right? And X number of people signed up for and or backed the project, right? So now I have them basically to Andrew's way of thinking about it, in this social media network for Anatomy of Dinosaurs, right?
Right.
They're all locked in. They're great. But now I'm doing this new Anatomy of Dogs book, which will be launching in 2025. So what Brad is saying is, how do I move those people from having signed up for getting the quote unquote social media of Anatomy of Dinosaurs to now signing up for the new social media of Anatomy of Dogs? It's another wrinkle that most people aren't prepared for, because again, it's the wrong tool for the job. They will sign up for the project, and you will have to message them multiple times to get them. By the way, Brad, don't you wish you could get all of your Kickstarter backers on day one and you didn't have, I hate having to bother people.
Just one. Yeah.
And so it's such a dance, because you have to bother people, because X number of people will wait until the last hour. And then every project, you'll finish it. It'll wrap and you'll get that email. Hey, did I miss it? It's like, son of a bitch, for 30 days, I've been screaming this from the rooftops. I hated myself every time I did it.
And your last Kickstarter, you forwarded the email to me. Literally, the timestamp was like 3 minutes after the Kickstarter ended.
Yeah,
it was literally within minutes. And this person said, "Oh, geez, did I miss it?" And it's like, oh my God.
And I get it. We're all busy. It's just what I'm saying is, when you're a nice person and you don't want to bother people, and you've just done 30 days of bothering people, it sucks so much to get to the end and have someone 3 minutes later go, did I miss it? Am I too late?
Well, yeah, because you wonder if they are representative of a whole group of people who didn't send the email.
Yes.
And that'll keep you up at night.
Yeah. I mean, as Phil Folio once said to us at Comic-Con, the best way to end a Comic-Con is to have one book left, because you always know that you sold out the perfect amount. Like if you sell your last book at 1 p.m. on a Sunday. You don't know if there were 10 more people that were going to come up on that Sunday afternoon and buy more. So it's all, anyway, Andrew, I think great thinking, but not the right tool for the job. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. Well, Brad, we got 2 updates for everybody. The first one is about the National Cartoon Society. As you will remember from last year, Brad and I went to the National Cartoon Society Reuben Awards for the first time in years and had a grand old time. Really enjoyed the heck out of it. And so I want to make everybody aware that this year's Reuben Awards is taking place in sunny San Diego, California, August 22nd through 24th. If you're not a member of the National Cartoon Society and you want to join, the website has information. If you are a member of the National Cartoon Society and you want to go to a Reuben Award weekend, I got to tell you, as a native of San Diego, there are a few prettier places in the world. San Diego is perfect in August. God, it's a great city. I'm going to be driving down myself. So August 22nd to 24th, the Reuben Awards for San Diego. And then the second update that I wanted to give you, Brad, and I knew you would appreciate this, is I have 10 titled Sheldon books at this point, 1 through 10.
Yeah.
And the 7th book is called Still Got It. And we've talked about this on the show that because you make mistakes all the time in business and it's good to learn from them. For whatever moment of hubris I was experiencing, I way overbought Still Got It. Like I ordered thousands more than I needed, right? Of Still Got It. So my joke to myself and with Brad for years was, I still got it. They're still in storage. I still got them. But eventually, I actually, of my own money, I paid a bunch in shipping and I shipped them off to Dolly Parton's Imagination Station, where it gives away books to kids. And we shipped a bunch to a vets organization in Chicago, and I got rid of all of them, right? I finally got rid of all of Still Got It, right? They're out of my life. I no longer Still Got It. And Brad knows this. Anytime you have any kind of storage or warehouse situation, sometimes you turn around, move a box, and behind that box is another thing. Well, it turns out Topatico in Massachusetts sent me something like 60 copies of Still Got It because they still got it, and they sent them back to me. And I was like, son of a Brad, the rest of my life, am I going to have this book in my life? Am I never going to have moved past this mistake of Still Got It?
Oh my God, that's too funny. That's too funny. And my only question, I mean, listen, I've done the same thing. Evil Inc. Volume 3 was my Donnybrook. I ordered
Donnybrook
way more of that.
Again with that phrase. Tot-a-tot, right. Father, are you going down to the film? Oh, it's a grand old Donnybrook it is. Tot-a-tot, right.
But I've done the same thing. My only question to you is, when you were ordering the number of these books, how much propofol were you on that day?
Oh God, I didn't see it coming. That was a perfect callback. Oh, chef's kiss. Oh, well done, my friend. How much? I tell you what, I wish I would have had some propofol and thrown a match at him. That's what I wish I would have done. So, gang, keep an eye out on the Sheldon Store website for a big discount on Book 7. Oh Sheldon still got it, because unfortunately I still got it, Brad.
Because you still got it.
I still got it. So I'm going to jump us into our next question, Brad, and this comes over on patreon.com/comiclab from Devin, and it says, Dear Comic Uncles, I have been a longtime listener, and this is my first time reaching out as a question asker, as a brand new Patreon supporter, Brad. Brand new Patreon supporter. Good work,
Welcome.
Devin. Thank you, my friend. I know that you guys have previously talked about parodies and the fair use of copyrighted material. And while I understand that you are not lawyers, and I would not consider your opinions as legal advice, very good of you, I do have a question. If I were to create a parody and offer it as a free download on my website or post it on platforms like Webtoons, would the positive exposure that it could generate be considered a form of payment for using copyrighted material? Thank you for all that you do, your homie, Devin. And then, Brad, I think we reached back out to Devin and we said, when you said payment, do you mean that someone could point to the downloads and attribute some sort of monetary value to the downloads? And Devin said, yes, and or notoriety that could potentially come from it. So basically they're saying, could the perceived market value of an uplifted reputation or a notoriety or a newly built audience be considered some sort of a cash value? Because we know it gets a little trickier once a parody involves money, right? Even though we're not lawyers, but let me just open it up to you, Brad. What do you make of Devin's question? What answer do you have for Devin?
Well, I think we might have a theme show here, because the theme of the previous question was kind of not a bad idea in its own way, but it had so many landmines out there that it maybe wasn't the right tool for the job.
Right.
I'm starting to think that this is kind of has the same aspects. So let's drill down on that a little bit, because it's a great question. Could the downloads and the notoriety generated from doing a parody be considered payment? Well, the answer to that is, of course, it depends.
Yeah,
and
helpfully.
And the truth of the matter is that if you were anytime you're dealing with somebody else's intellectual property, it could be perceived as a conflict. And if somebody wants to try to protect their property rights, they may get up in your face over it.
Say it a different way, in America at least, if somebody wants to sue you, they don't need a justification. If they're mad that you use their IP, even if the court would eventually 3 years from now find that your parody was completely on the up and up and allowable, they can still sue you and make your life miserable, right? And Disney has shown that time and again.
And I wouldn't even say that it's unfounded all of the time. Because if somebody owns intellectual property and you're using that intellectual property, then you are skating on thin ice that you've got to go through very carefully. And you see people do this all the time, even though Mad Magazine hasn't been a viable concern, hasn't been part of the pop culture for many years now. People always point to Mad Magazine. They'll say, well, this is the same thing that Mad Magazine does, so it's okay for me to do it. I'm going to take this intellectual property that I've got no connection to whatsoever, and I'm just going to put something together that trades off of the intellectual property's popularity. And so therefore, I'll get some of that money that somebody might have otherwise put towards a legitimate piece of merchandise for that property. That's that's problematic. That you can really get into a problem. And by the way, if you think you're going to stand in front of a judge, or like if a platform shuts you down because the IP holder complained, if you think you're going to sit there and say, well, Mad Magazine, you're nuts. Mad Magazine is part of a huge corporation that has lawyers on retainer, and you don't.
Right. And listen, we have Mad Magazine to thank for Weird Al Yankovic's career, and I'll tell you what I mean by this. Mad Magazine, I'm going to get the year wrong. It was somewhere in the 60s. There was a famous parody case, Berlin versus EC Publications, where Mad Magazine, which was not owned by a big conglomerate at that point, I think it was fairly smallish. It was run by, what was his name, Gaines?
William Gaines.
Oh, William Gaines. I wanted to say Chip Gaines, but that's the guy from that's the Texas dude from the housing show. So not Chip Gaines, Chip and Joanna Gaines. So when Chip and Joanna Gaines ran Mad Magazine, Brad,
God.
they
anyway, don't say that. Somebody's going to believe you. They're going to tune in late.
So William Gaines was running Mad Magazine, and they did a song parody, right, where they used the lyrics from songs, again, mid-'60s, and they parodied a bunch of them. And a bunch of song publishers got together and said, "Hey, this is bullshit. You can't use our lyrics. That's you're going, because remember, there's two forms of copyright on a song. There's the performative copyright, but then there's also the written copyright, right? So it's a slightly different thing than we have, but you get the idea. Anyway, publishers sued them, and Mad Magazine won. It was a huge landmark case for song parody in the U.S. But here's the thing. They had to pull up with the bullshit of being sued for 2 to 3 years, right? Right. And so they won. Yes, Mad Magazine, landmark case, they won. They still had to pay for lawyers for 2 or 3 years. They still had to go to sleep every night at 2 a.m. going, oh my God, am I going to lose my business over this?
What's going to happen?
Yeah. And so, and this is true with anybody that's gone through a lawsuit. You have to sit there and go like, well, 3 years from now, I'll have an answer. But in the meantime, I have to swallow it. So what Brad is getting at there is that even if they're unjustified, the owner of the IP, like Disney, can very often just threaten legal action as a way to go, do I really want to live like this for the next 2 or 3 years of my life in a court case, or do I just want to take this thing down? And very often Disney wins because no one wants to live under the threat of a court case for 2 or 3 years, so they just take the thing down. So anyway, I will transition us into the next thing that I think is a potential problem for your line of thought here, which is you're involving Webtoons. Right? This is a third-party platform that you are hosting your comic on. That's different than Brad and I hosting on DreamHost, where ostensibly to the world, that is Brad's site, that is my site, those are owned by ourselves. Yeah. You are putting a parody up on Webtoons, which is a company that's well capitalized, unlike you. They are well capitalized and very suable if an IP company wanted to go after them. And it's also, it goes against what Webtoons wants out of Webtoons. Webtoons wants to develop IP from young 20-year-olds that once they've locked them in on that contract, which, by the way, I don't think you should sign, that says in perpetuity, not after you decide to leave Webtoons, but in perpetuity, they have first right of refusal to develop your property in video games and movies and other platforms and other media. That's what they want out of Webtoons. They don't want parodies on their site. They want IP that they can eventually own and control and make money from in more profitable mediums. So I think you might find it's not the best platform to put a parody because they don't want to deal with that bullshit of lawsuits and C&Ds and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and you mentioned Weird Al Yankovic, and it's worth noting, just to bring that thought around a little bit, is that Weird Al, if you read interviews with him, they ask him this all the time. And Mad Magazine gets brought up in these conversations too, where they say, about the legal rights and everything. And Weird Al says, I don't do any song without getting permission first. Right. And they're like, well, wait a minute, it's parody. It's fair use. You don't have to. And he's like, yeah, but... right. And he's like, technically, you're right. You could make that argument, but who wants to be making that argument when you're saying they're in court? So like he's already said there have been some songs that he's written that didn't come about because he didn't get the permission, or they almost didn't get the permission. Of course, the first question everybody asks him is this one going to be about food? Because a bunch of his hits were, food related. But he does not do any of that without clearing it with the IP owner first.
Well, two things I want to jump off on that with parody. Didn't Madonna famously not give him permission for something? And he made it very public that he's like, yeah, Madonna did not give me permission. And then what's great is it made the world kind of go, Madonna's a bit of shit in terms of like not being willing to poke fun at herself. So by the way, other artists are so happy when Weird Al reaches out and they're like, oh, please parody my song. I would love that, and the second thing I was going to say to that is, because this is kind of related under the rubric of fair use. When Fred and I did our documentary Stripped, documentaries have a very clear and established policy of fair use in the U.S. where you can use film clips, you can use photos, you can use snippets of this and that of copyrighted material within a documentary because that's fair use. You're making a social commentary. It's a form of saying like, I'm creating a textbook, but it's a public textbook. It's a documentary. So there's established court cases. You can get away with it. It's not a problem. But Fred and I made damn sure we got signatures for every piece of media, every cartoon, every interview, every song we used, because even though we probably would have won in court, it sure does suck to spend $20,000 to get to picture lock, or another $20,000 to get to audio lock, or another, color correction, another $5,000 to $10,000. To spend all that money, and then you have to go and change the film because somebody's suing you over a piece of media that you do have fair rights to, but they're not going to let you use it in the doc, or they're going to sue you over it. All of which to say is, to Brad's point, your rights to use IP in parody are pretty well established in the US. The problem is you don't have the well of lawyers behind you that Saturday Night Live has from NBC.
Right.
You don't have the well of lawyers from Mad Magazine, or the remnants of Mad Magazine has from, what is it, Paramount at this point? I don't remember. I forget who owns them at this point.
Last I checked in, it was Time Warner that owned them.
But, so that would be Warner Brothers, yeah. But you get my point is you don't have this well of lawyers that are already on staff. They don't have to pay anybody. They're already on staff. Yeah. And so it is the sad truth of the world that you just got to be careful with parody. I roll the dice every time I do parody. Brad rolls the dice every time he does parody, because it's all it takes is a C&D from a lawyer on staff, and suddenly you're on notice, Yeah. And so the second thing I would say to this question is building notoriety through someone else's IP.
Yeah, let's get to that.
And I actually think, I bet you Brad has better thoughts than I do. So I'm actually going to turn it over to you, Brad. What do you think about building your career on the backs of parody from someone else's IP?
So that thought came to my mind too, and that's where I was really coming down on the wrong tool for the job, because so there's two ways that could go. One of them is that you're going to be you see your career as somebody who does parodies all the time. Like you're going to be a one-person Mad Magazine. Your parody comics are going to be your thing.
Right.
And I if that was you and you were in a comics consultation with me, I would be spending the entire 90 minutes trying to talk you out of that, because of all the things that we've been talking about in the entire second segment of this show, right? Everything we've talked about up until now, I would not be suggesting you do that. But the other way that you could think about this is, I'm going to gain notoriety by doing this parody. And then I'm going to, once I build my audience around this parody thing, and again, you're technically, I'm going to use stealing in a loose way here, but you're stealing that other intellectual property. You're trying to stand on the shoulders of those people that created that original intellectual property. And then you're going to say, then I'm going to transfer that audience over to this other thing that I'm going to do that's just going to be my thing. And that's how I'm going to build my audience. Build it with this parody and transfer them to this other thing. If that's what you're thinking, and I'm not saying that it is, but if that's what you're thinking, you wouldn't be the first, and you wouldn't be the first to absolutely wipe out doing it. And I'll tell you why. The strategy behind that, transferring audience to a new thing, is notoriously difficult.
Right.
Because your thing is probably going to be so different than the original intellectual property. And what happens is, when you build an audience that loves you for doing this thing, and then you say, hey, if you love this thing, you're going to love that thing. And they're going to say, no, we don't want that thing. We want more of this thing. This thing that you brought us in the door that we really like. Product A, comic A, we like it when you do comic A. And you go, yeah, but if you love, and I've seen this happen where the difference between A and B are so small. It's just really the new thing is the exact same thing, except it doesn't have the licensed characters.
It doesn't have Pokemon in it or Sonic in it,
but it does. But it's got the same character types. It's got the same type of writing. It's got the same charm. It's got everything except the IP. And the people go, I don't want anything to do with that. I want this other thing that you brought me in the door. Loving. I don't want that other thing. So if you're trying to build notoriety through that and try to build your audience, and then you think you're going to transfer them over, you wouldn't be the first person to come up with that strategy, and you wouldn't be the first person to absolutely wipe out trying to do that strategy, because turns out people like what they like. And if you build your audience doing the wrong thing, you're going to be stuck there. So now let's take a look at this person doing a parody comic. He can't transfer him over, and he got away with the first parody, but the second parody zonks him. They come out of nowhere and they send him a cease and desist. Now what? Right? I just... In the where we stand right now in late stage capitalism, I would say that there's never been a worse time to try to launch something under the guise of parody. I think oh man. So again, wrong tool for the job. I think that whole playing field has minefields all over it.
I agree with Brad. And a lot of that problem of minefields has to do with consolidation in media, in the sense that we're now down to, and Brad can correct me if I have it wrong, we're either like 5 or 7 large media companies that own most of what you consume in your life. Maybe under 10 if you include 1 or 2 of the big video game houses. But for the most part, it's like there's a chart somewhere online that shows you just the panoply of different things that you thought were independent or independently owned or operated that are owned by a large corporation. And so it makes it harder because, again, they have those attorneys on staff. It costs them nothing to issue a C&D for your Pokemon comic or Sonic or Genshin Impact or Star Trek thing, whatever it's going to be. It costs them nothing to just send you a C&D. They don't need to know if it's going to work or not legally. They just, it does what it's supposed to do in terms of scaring you. So let's say you get 2 years into this, by the way, of doing your parody comic, and you get a C&D, Brad. But you're not ready with the thing that you were going to transition them to. And you haven't been transitioning to them because you've been working on your parody comic. Well, then what do? You're back at square zero. You got nothing to share with these people that came here for the Sonic the Hedgehog comics. And now you got nothing to give them. And you have nowhere to point them. And your thing's not ready. So...
And the further you run the clock out, the worse it gets. Like you said, what happens if it's 2 years in? And I gasped audibly, right? Because I saw what you were building there. It just gets worse. Let's say it doesn't happen at 2 years. It happens at 3 years, though. Even worse. 5 years. Catastrophic. 10 years. Holy shit, right? I mean, every year that you live to fight another day, every year that the bullet with your name on it misses you, it just makes things worse because when that bullet does come, you're in big trouble. Yeah.
So you might be saying, well, then what can I do? I want to do parody. You can't. What Brett and I are saying is you can. Legally, you can. We're just saying it's kind of a house of sand or built on a house of sand. Sorry, it's a house built on sand. Oh my God. It's the third time's the charm on that phrase. It's a house built on sand in the sense that it can be pulled away from you at any second, and it doesn't really build. Like, I'm going to give you a number, and I might not be right, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. I'm going to guess that if you built this parody audience for your Sonic or Pokemon or Star Trek or whatever it's going to be, comics, and then you try to transition them to the IP that you've been really wanting to do all along, I bet you'd be able to successfully transfer somewhere between 2 to 15%. Not a lot. That's pushing it. 15 is really pushing it. I bet you most people would be like, I came here for they're holding their churro. I came here for the Sonic comics. I don't want this nonsense that you're drawing. And so it's really hard. But here's the thing. Had you spent that time building your world, building your IP, as Brad and I have talked about in the past, you can build your Sherlock, your Sonic the Hedgehog, your Pokemon, your Mickey Mouse. It's going to take you years, but it's going to take you years anyway to build an audience. So why not build it with your IP?
I'm so you took the words right out of my mouth, because that's the next topic I was going to go to. There is, we talked about this when it came to public domain. And my thing was, you could do a Sherlock Holmes comic and just never tell anyone that it's a Sherlock Holmes comic. Right. You don't call the character Sherlock. His best friend is not named Watson. You create all of those.
Pennsylvania. Exactly.
Yeah. But you could do a parody of Sherlock Holmes and never call and make it completely disguised. You could still do all that stuff that appeals to you creatively, except you don't do it overtly. You don't tell a single soul about it until they're giving you that award for your career, and you're saying, oh, by the way, nobody ever knew this, but that's actually a Sherlock Holmes parody. I just never told. Just like I think that you could probably imagine if you remember the TV show House MD. I think that was a Sherlock Holmes parody. What if Sherlock was a medical doctor? Right. And I think the only thing about that it doesn't appeal to some people is that you don't get that quick influx of audience because you're standing on somebody else's intellectual property.
Exactly.
Right. The only reason you don't do that is because you can't get. And I've talked to people who said that, people that were very close, like people that I had tutored, people that had been had heard me talk so much that my voice was rattling around in their head when they weren't around me. And they wanted to do something that was Disney related. And I said, but why Disney? Why of all of them, why Disney? And the answer was, well, because I see people doing that on Instagram. They've got huge numbers. Well, and I'm like, and you know what I said to the person? They don't have huge numbers. Disney has huge numbers. Yeah. They got bupkis. When push comes to shove, they don't have huge numbers. They got nothing. Disney has those numbers. They're there for the Disney characters. Yeah. They're not there for that artist. And so, yes, it's a slower start. Everything that Dave and I talk about on this show is slower. Everything. There's not a goddamn shortcut to be found on this show.
I love it when you become grandpa on the porch. There's not a god, because you know why? You don't say God with a G, you say it with a T. There's not a goddamn way to make a shortcut on this.
There is not. Everything that we're saying is disappointing because it's slower. But I'm telling you, telling you, we wouldn't be doing a very good job of giving you helpful advice if we didn't say, listen, here's this shit that we've seen. We've been doing this for so many years. We've seen all this stuff come and go over, and it's Groundhog Day over here. And so, I get what you're going at, and parody is absolutely protected under copyright law. But, oh man, look out for those landmines.
Yeah, I think the phrase that we're looking for in this moment is chasing the dragon, because much like a drug high, doing a parody will get you a huge and sudden mass inflow of people coming to your website because, like Brad said, you're tapping into their pre-existing audience. But you're going to be chasing that dragon, and it's going to be really, actually, frankly, harder to go to your IP than had you just started with diminished expectations from the start. Do you know what I mean, Brad? Like, you've seen what the internet can provide when you do a Sonic comic and suddenly tens of thousands of people show up and then they disappear the next day when there's not a Sonic comic.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, emotionally, it's easier to just slowly build from 1 reader to 2 readers to 5 readers to 16 readers to 38, rather than having seen, when I did that Sonic comic, I got 40,000 people that came to my website in that first hour. Like, that's hard. It's hard to have that feeling to then switch to your IP. So in some respects, it's actually easier emotionally to start and slowly build with your IP, even though both, like Brad says, takes a goddamn couple of years to get that audience going. It's in some ways it's emotionally easier.
Yeah, well, and that's, I guess, what we're talking to you about through this whole show is that sometimes you've got to make the choice that's emotionally a little bit more difficult. Yes. And I'll give you a good case in point here, Dave. I've got something I've got to do here that's a little emotionally difficult for me because turns out another hour has gone by, and I've come to the point where, as much as I don't want to say it, I got to say that you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Well, Brad, I'm going to disagree with you. You've made a bad legal decision here. I don't know if you've been taking propofol in the past 24 hours, but I guess now I have to say it. Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com, who just bought a car online in the last 5 minutes that he didn't need. He's also the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomics.com. And I'll tell you what Dave told his anesthesiologist right after she hit that plunger. He said, one thing.
She's waiting 45 minutes for the answer. Oh, God, that's funny. I'm going to say the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by the ever-wonderful Matt Woodard, who we are so thankful for, of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, and gosh darn it, we know that you do, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. And we've been talking, and Dave, right now, our Patreon is at 463 backers, and we are, of course, encouraging people to help us get to 500 so we can get to that Drunk Comic Lab. But you know what? In this economy, in the way things are going, maybe being a Patreon backer is not a good fit for everybody. And if that's you, we understand. But you know what you can do that's free, that is super helpful? Go over there to Spotify, give us a 5-star review. That's going to help us grow this show immensely. It doesn't cost you a thing, and we love you for it.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/Comic Lab. So I will go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/Propofol just made me establish a company in Delaware. So in all seriousness, Brad, what would be a legal decision like that you could I mean, I see that guy bought the car, right?
Yeah,
And he probably could return it within 24 hours. I don't know. But what would be why would my anesthesiologist have warned me of propofol 5 times about making a legal decision?
Oh my gosh. I don't know why, but I keep thinking about that guy that got married to Anna Nicole Smith. Remember that? Back in the day that he was somewhere between 89 years old and deaf, and he got married to Anna Nicole Smith. And I always wondered about the legal, whether that was such a great legal idea.
I think for him it was a great idea. I don't know about for her. But he was born somewhere, I think, about the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. I think he was at the founding of Babylon. That guy was so old. If you're not familiar with the story.
How old was he?
Yeah, exactly.
He was so old, he had a social security number of 1.